Welcome to today's webinar. We'll be discussing today the topic of NIS2 and OT security and providing you a practical roadmap to compliance. We'll be talking today about the NIS2 regulations and also how Rockwell and Verve can help you with your path to compliance. My name is John Speakman. I work for Rockwell Automation. I'm part of the Rockwell cybersecurity services team. I'm the team lead for EMEA North. So I look after a lot of NIS2 impacted countries, but also the UK. And we've got a slightly different challenge here in the UK with NIS2. Joining me today is Andrea.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and I'm Andrea Quartiela. I'm the Lifecycle Services Commercial Manager for the EMEA region within Rockwell Automation.
Thanks, Andrea. So quick introduction regarding Rockwell and our cybersecurity services. So Rockwell, we take a proactive approach to cybersecurity. Prevention is better than cure, as you can imagine. But we do understand the challenges of securing OT systems, as this is something that we live and breathe every day. We've been building a cybersecurity practice for many years now, probably 12 plus years. It's part of the business that is growing very rapidly. We grow this business through investing in our own capabilities, as well as investing in acquiring strategic technology partners, such as Verve, who joined Rockwell in November of last year. And we recognize industrial cybersecurity challenges as being complex. Many of our customers have been operating these systems for many years. These OT networks are traditionally complex environments, and they can have lots of legacy systems in there as well. And often these systems are viewed as being too complex. So part of the challenge that we're often faced with our customers is somehow simplifying these systems. The attacks that we're dealing with are becoming ever increasingly more sophisticated. Most of the attacks that we unfortunately have to deal with these days are facilitated by what's known as ransomware as a service. So these are sophisticated criminal organizations that are exploiting customer operations for financial gain, usually for financial gain. These organizations are usually fairly well skilled, and this exposes the skills gap that many of our customers are also experiencing. There are a significant lack of suitable resources in OT cybersecurity, and this is a challenge that many of our customers are facing. And through the cybersecurity services unit, this is a key focus for us in helping customers plug this gap. There are an emerging number of threats. We see new threats and new vulnerabilities exposed every day. The changing landscape of IoT networks means that we're seeing a proliferance of devices being added to OT systems. These devices can increase the attack surface and therefore further complicate the challenge of enforcing cybersecurity. And then, of course, we've got compliance standards, like we're talking about today around NIS2. Many of our customers are already regulated by fairly stringent cybersecurity legislation, especially when it comes to functional safety, for example. But NIS2 is different in that it's bringing into the scope of legislation for the first time many of our customer operators that previously have not had to deal with this kind of legislation before. So it's a complicated landscape for those, or it can appear to be a complicated landscape to those that have not dealt with this kind of thing before. But Rockwell have got significant experience in navigating through these various compliance standards. But NIS2 is the topic of conversation today. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea right now, who's going to take you through a bit more information about NIS2 and about some of the background to NIS2 and some of the changes from previous legislation. And then I'll join again shortly to go into a bit more detail as to how Rockwell and Verve can actually help you navigate your way to compliance. Andrea?
Thank you, John. Thank you for setting the scene. And on the next slide, we are just going straight into today's topic about NIS2 directive. And we need to get ready now, and it's something that's time sensitive because the NIS2 directive it's entered into force and it must be transposed by each of European Union member states by 17th of October this year. It means in a couple of weeks. The NIS2 directive is a legislation that wants to enhance the cyber resilience, mainly focusing on critical infrastructures for all the countries in the Union. And it wants to make sure that there are a minimum set of requirements, and this, as I said, will be transposed into local laws in each and every country. The fact that we call it NIS2 is because there is a predecessor, NIS1. In fact, it was not called NIS1, it's called NIS, and it's already dates back from 2016. But now there are a significant amount of changes, especially in the industries that are impacted, and it's a much broader scope, as we'll see in detail. And this is kind of in response of the increasing number of attacks and cybersecurity incidents that we have seen in the European Union, especially target critical infrastructure in the recent years. Okay, just a little bit more about the transition from NIS to NIS2. In NIS, originally, the target was what we call the operators of essential services, or also known as critical infrastructure, basically water, transport, financial institutions, energy, infrastructure, healthcare, water, and wastewater. While now in NIS2, the main change is that we move from the concept of operators of essential services into what we call entities classification or industry classification. All the operators of essential services are still in the scope, but in this classification, we have essential entities and important entities. And I would say most of the former operator of essential services fall under the essential entity category: energy, transport, health, water, wastewater. There are a few new sectors, industrial sectors, that are added as essential. And now we have the important entities, which are kind of, I would say, new categories like manufacturing, like food production and distribution, chemical industry, and digital providers. And there is also an extended look at the supply chain security, looking for making sure not only we are covered in-house, but we are resilient to supply chain attacks, looking at the potential entities or potential companies that are on our supply chain. In terms of compliance, basically, there is a minimum set of requirements that all entities must implement: risk management, incident response plans, supply chain security, as already mentioned, vulnerability reporting, and we'll see that there are strict deadlines and requirements in this area, especially in incident reporting. Now, if something happens, we are obliged or will be obliged to send an notification to the corresponding governmental agency within 24 hours of the incident, and then complete initial assessment within 72 hours. And within 30 days, a final detailed report must be submitted. And in order to enforce the directive, this comes with significant potential penalties that are, from the financial side, could be up to 10 million euros or up to 2% of the global annual revenue of the company. For essential entities, and for important entities, a little bit less, up to 7 million euros or up to 1.4% of the annual global revenue. There are also potentially impacts to the legal representative of the entity, or the executives or board members. If there is an incident and we cannot prove that we have taken the necessary actions and there is not a plan in place, etc., the authorities could also ban the individual of being in the role, in an executive role. Then it's important not only, let's say, from financial standpoint, but also from accountability standpoint in front of the justice. And why the European Union is doing all of this new directive? What is the final objectives, the purpose? It's, as you will see, provide a much broader scope. We want to be better protect, and also clear rules that everybody needs to adhere, depending on the type of entity you are falling on. And expand the requirements over the original NIS, Network Information Security Directive, which is, as I mentioned already, a bit old, 8 years ago, and make the company and the management of the company more accountable to comply with the directive, and establish a strict and oversight and stricter potential penalties, clearly define the incident reporting obligations and timelines and deadlines, and also make sure that there is a much stronger supply chain security and increase cooperation across countries within the Union. Then probably the first question is that if my company is in scope, who is applicable to NIS2? Who is NIS2 applicable to? Then all the member states must identify and impose the requirements to any company that, and here we look from different angles. There is kind of one angle, which is the size of the company, in number of employees. Above 50 employees, you may be in scope. Regarding turnover, you are making a revenue which is bigger than 10 million euros per year, you may be in scope. But I mean, it doesn't matter which size and number of employees, which size and number of turnover, if the service that your company is providing is deemed essential or important to the health, safety, or stability of the union, even if you are smaller than 50 people, even if you are making less than 10 million euros revenue per year, you might be in scope because you are kind of a critical. Also, as we mentioned, being or not in scope, depending on where are you playing, what is your industry, what is your business. Then we mentioned these two classification, which is a new type of classification: essential entities, energy, companies involved in supply, distribution, transmission, sale of electricity, oil and gas, heating, cooling, hydrogen, electrical vehicle charging, point operators, etc. Health, of course, anything around healthcare, but also research laboratories, pharmaceuticals, medical device manufacturing. In water, which was already seen or perceived as an operator of essential services, we include as well now wastewater operators. All what is in yellow, it's kind of new versus the original NIS. It's new on NIS2. Operators of transport for air, rail, road, and water transport. Space industry, again, new. Industry, digital infrastructure, all the DNS providers, registers, cloud computing, service providers, data centers providers, etc. Public administration, finance, all financial institutions, banking, and financial market. And then we have this new classification, which are important entities. And you see, almost all here, it's new. It's manufacturing, and it's kind of quite broad because it looks or focuses on specific manufacturing sectors: medical devices, electronic products, electrical equipment, machinery, motor vehicles, and other transport equipment. Chemicals, any producer or distributor of chemicals, companies that produce and distribute food products, research, waste management. We saw on the essential category it was wastewater, but any other type of waste management is considered important. Digital providers and postal and courier services. So we have much more industries, a lot of customers that were not impacted by the original NIS2 directive. They are impacted by the NIS2 directive. In terms of timelines, NIS2 entered into force already in 2023, beginning of 2023. Now we are just a couple of weeks away of the initial deadline that the European Union set to all the member states for the transposition of the law. It's set as 17th of October. But I have to mention that a significant amount of countries seems to be late. In fact, there are only 3 countries. On top of my head, I remember it's Belgium, Hungary, and I think it's Croatia, that already have the NIS2 directive transposed into a local law. There are another significant group of countries that it's kind of work in progress. They have a draft published. Either the draft has been open for comments or it's already closed for comments, or maybe it's ready to be approved or the decree to be published or issued. And there are a number of member states that they don't yet have the draft published or open for comments. So it looks like that not everybody will be ready by the deadline set by the European Union. And then there is a third important milestone, which is mid-April 25, which all member states must identify and hold a register of all the companies, all the entities that are in scope, meaning essential entities or important entities must be identified and must be in the register in each and every country. What is this term transposition? Because I said that the NIS2 directive is a European directive and needs to be transposed. Transposition each country needs to take the directive and transpose into a local law that may be kind of pretty similar, or may differ, or there might be some additions, but the directive itself is just at Europe level or European Union level. The companies operating on each of the member states will need to comply with the local law. That's why it's necessary to have this directive transposed into a local law into each and every member state. What are the requirements for compliance? What are the security obligations of NIS2? And this is, I know this is quite a busy slide, but it covers a lot of things from policies and procedures, policies on risk analysis, on information security, how we handle when we have an incident, prevention, detections, and very important, we already mentioned about the incident response and the strict timelines and potential penalties if we are not communicating as per the required guidelines. Crisis management, business continuity, do we have a disaster recovery system, backup, etc. Looking also at the supply chain security, evaluating our suppliers, the company that we interact with. We've seen in the past also a significant number of events that could be considered as supply chain attacks. Security in the network, including vulnerability and how we handle disclosures. Policies and procedures related to risk management. Basic cyber hygiene. There is a very interesting and significant chapter in the directive about the need of implementing a basic cyber hygiene program. And this is a kind of a must-have. And especially in the OT world, in the automation world, this could be a very broad topic because it comes from having the latest and greatest products and updates in terms of software, firmware, etc., making sure that we are not using products where we have known vulnerabilities. it comes to patch management, to vulnerability management, etc. Very important, because this is I would say, the cornerstone, the basic cyber hygiene program. Policies related encryption and cryptography where appropriate, making sure that there are access control policies from asset management, from physical security, use multi-factor authentication or continuous authentication solutions where applicable. Then lot of compliance requirements around NIS2. So for a lot of companies, especially I would say the newcomers, the ones that are new industry sectors that were not covered by the NIS, the non-operator of essential services, a lot of homework to do. Then, as I mentioned, or as a recap, we need to make sure that we are able to comply with the requirements in terms of incident response, very strict timelines in terms of reporting obligation. Then, first question, do we have an incident response plan in place? And the current plan, if we have one, it's ready. We have the policies and procedures to communicate to the local authorities within these timelines. If we are operating a 24/7 manufacturing plant, this means that if we have an incident Saturday night, we must communicate during Sunday that we have this incident. Then it means that we need to have the people, the policies, the procedures, the teams in place, or the outsourced service in place to handle this incident response program that stick to the deadlines. Just a recap on the exposure to if we are not compliant. As I mentioned, for essential entities, fines up to 10 million euros or 2% of the total annual worldwide turnover, up to 7 million or at least 1.5% for important entities. And legal implications, senior management teams may be accountable in front of the law if they fail to adhere to the new rules. And with this, I will hand over to John, and I will breathe for a minute. You need to mute, John.
Yeah, apologies. It was raining really hard here a moment ago, so I thought I'd keep that quiet. But yeah, so the importance of cybersecurity in the OT environment cannot be overstated. NIS2 introduces some of this into law, but a lot of it is best practice anyway. Of course, important factors such as production continuity and protecting intellectual property, brand integrity, and so on all seem pretty obvious. But we need to translate the need for cybersecurity into things like reducing downtime. So this is production impacting. The consequences of poor levels of cybersecurity are often production impacting, failing to meet production targets and service level agreements, and safety, the potential impact of a compromise on safety systems, so the safety of people, so employees and the general public, and safety of the facility, safety of the product is critical. The costs of downtime can be very high, and latest estimates are that by 2025, the cost of cybercrime, so the cost of ransomware, so this is not just the cost of the ransomware itself, but the loss of production, the downtime, the cost of recovery is expected to approach $10 trillion. Every organization is vulnerable, so we have a saying in our cybersecurity services business unit around security through obscurity. Lots of our operators do feel that because their systems are rather old and they use non-standard protocols, legacy systems, that they're in some way protected. But of course, this is not true. Every organization is vulnerable, especially from a cybercrime point of view. The perpetrators of cybercrime don't really care what it is that you're doing. We've seen charitable organizations targeted, as well as critical infrastructure. The problem that most of our customers have is that they're challenged when detecting these cyber attacks. A lot of OT networks are unmonitored, and so detection can be very challenging. And when incidents do happen, as I said earlier, we prefer to take the proactive approach, but when incidents do happen, we find that many of our customers are not prepared. They don't have a proper response plan in place, and so recovery can be a challenge. So how can we help? How can Rockwell Automation help? NIS2 is going to be a new set of requirements for many of our customers. But as Andrea mentioned, we have been dealing with the original NIS directive for a number of years now in the UK and across Europe. And NIS2 does have some changes, but it's nothing that, in our opinion, operators of critical and important manufacturing systems shouldn't already be doing. We've developed this services business unit, as I said earlier, through significant investment, through technical partnerships and through acquisition, to build a real comprehensive range of services now, from initial assessment through to full turnkey cybersecurity services. But there are some practical steps that you can take. So for those industries that are classed as essential, there are probably 7 key steps that you fundamentally need to take on board here. Step 1 is understanding what you've got and how it operates. This is probably easier said than done. Don't underestimate the complexity of step 1. Many times the biggest challenge for our customers is this critical first step. What have we got in the environment? How is it operating? What is it doing? What are the vulnerabilities associated with this system? So we'll delve into that a little bit more in a moment. Step 2 is this gap analysis of step 1 versus NIS2 compliance. So what have we got, and where does it need to be improved in order to gain compliance, whether it's through additional security, whether it's through enhanced cybersecurity controls, whether it's improvements that can be made through training and through lifecycle or modernization. Step 3 is planning the remediation and using standards to plan that remediation. We'll come to the topic of frameworks in a moment, but there are many frameworks out there, in particular the NIST cybersecurity framework, which I'll cover in a moment, that gives you very detailed and practical guidance on how to build a cybersecurity program and critical steps, critical functions that you need to consider during that program. Then we've got standards such as IEC 62443 that you can use to very accurately measure the success of these frameworks. Step 4 is consider where you need to use external expertise to complement your internal skill. Now, some of our customers have very capable OT cybersecurity teams. They tend to be the customers that have been dealing with this kind of legislation or some kind of legislation for a number of years, or operators of systems that are particularly sensitive, such as life sciences. They've been that kind of operator have been dealing with the confidentiality of patient data, for example, within production environments, or extremely valuable intellectual property that they've been protecting for a number of years. So they may well have very well skilled, very well resourced teams internally, but always there will be gaps. And what we're finding with, for example, food and beverage customers who up to now have been in very limited scope for any kind of cybersecurity legislation and have less internal capability, so more likely to need that external resource. But understand where you need additional assistance and resource to assist. Step 5 is to mitigate the risk that you've identified. So that's likely to include new policies and procedures, new ways of working, OT cybersecurity management system as separate from IT cybersecurity management system. Again, this is nothing new for critical infrastructure operators that have been subject to the original NIS legislation for a few years now. But for those coming into scope of NIS2, it's likely to be new. you're going to need new technologies, new response and recovery strategies. Step 6 is the process of continuous improvement. Cybersecurity program is not a program that has a beginning and an end. It is ongoing. You need to be able to demonstrate continuous improvement. And that's driven by having a strong cybersecurity culture to ensure compliance. And this brings us on to step 7, which is to train and empower your employees. In the world of OT, operators can very often be your most effective security sensors. Operators of these OT systems know how they behave. They know how the manufacturing environment behaves. They know when things are not behaving as they should do. We've seen examples in the past, for example, of HMIs that start to glitch, or mouse cursors that are moving randomly across the screen when they haven't done so before. Often these are very early indicators of compromise, that something's not right with the system, that it may, in fact, be compromised. So train and empower your employees to recognize these potential little system glitches that could be an early warning that something is going wrong with the system. I mentioned the NIST framework. So this was first created in 2014. It was updated in 2023 to include the governance pillar on the left-hand side. But historically, we've had 5 main pillars of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Governance now has a wrap around that. If anyone's familiar with UK critical infrastructure here, they'll be familiar with the National Cybersecurity Centre's Cyber Assessment Framework, often shortened to CAF. CAF looks very similar to the NIST framework. None of these frameworks, none of these assessment frameworks are anything particularly revolutionary. They all follow a very similar process. These pillars of identify, understand what you've got, protect it, have network monitoring in place to detect changes to the environment or indicators of compromise, have a response plan in place, and make sure that response plan is tailored for OT. Most of the time, you will find that your IT incident response plan is not compatible with an OT incident response plan, which generally speaking, OT incident response plans will tend to include response capabilities for potentially chemical spill with chemical manufacture of chemicals coming in, fire, major accident, and so on. And recover, we can often be lulled into a false sense of security with OT manufacturing systems being extremely reliable and having very long life cycle. And when things do go wrong, this is when we find a lot of operators are exposed because the recovery plan doesn't properly consider doesn't properly consider legacy systems that may be fairly old, and the availability of spares, the availability of repairs or remanufacturing to get these systems back online can often cause problems. So there's workload associated with these different pillars. But it's safe to say that the first 2, identify and protect, involve the most tasks. This is where the greatest effort is generally required. There's daily maintenance and management involved in both of these pillars. And this is where you will find that most security programs are the most effective. This is where we like to focus our energy, certainly with what we'll show in a minute from the Verve platform. This is where we can make the most savings and create the most efficiencies with these large workloads. Detect is your continuous monitoring. I said earlier, it's your fire alarm. So when things are going wrong, a well-tuned, well-implemented detection platform will provide you with that early warning that there is something potentially going bad with the system. And the respond and recover pillars are infrequent, hopefully infrequent. You need to test these rather than hopefully be reliant on them. These are your emergency situations. They're going to be specific incident-based that will drive respond and recovery. But as I said, hopefully these will be infrequent. So how we use Verve to tackle identify starts with this this detailed understanding of what you have. As I said earlier, this is easier said than done, and we need tools like Verve to help improve the process of identification. We talk about this deep understanding of what you have, not just what you have, but the associated vulnerabilities, and crucially, what they're doing. How critical are these assets? Are they fundamental to your operations? All this information is critical to a cybersecurity program. We talk about the definition of an inventory. This isn't just a list of things. This is what they do. How critical are they? How old are they? Is there any existing protections in the system that's offering some level of countermeasure to protect these assets? This is not just a spreadsheet of things. The spreadsheet is it's not updated. It's a single point in time. You've got limited data. Network-based detection systems, we have a number of intrusion detection partners. The challenge with network-based detection systems is that they have limited visibility. It's limited by the capabilities of the OT network. And this is compounded by the fact that in OT, we'll often see unmanaged switches, we'll see islands of automation, we'll see nested networks, and so on. So when we as Rockwell and Verve talk about asset inventory, we're talking about getting deep into the lower levels, down into level 1 and below of the OT environment, and collecting really rich, we sometimes refer to this as a 3D view of every single asset. What is it? What is it doing? How is it connected? How is it communicating with the rest of the system? How is it configured? Are there any compensating controls such as antivirus or whitelisting? How is the network configured? How are firewalls configured? How are switches configured? How is the device administered? Are there local accounts and users on there? Is the device domain linked? And so on. We collect, using the Verve platform, over 300 characteristics about every single asset in the system. So when we talk about an asset inventory, this is what we're talking about. And an asset inventory, understanding what you have, is absolutely crucial to any successful cybersecurity program. How you're going to manage those vulnerabilities is absolutely crucial to be able to demonstrate NIS compliance. Now, the challenge we've got in OT is that this will throw up lots of vulnerabilities. Any OT system that's a few years old will suffer the same problems. This is a lack of patching. It is a lack of maintenance. It will be the fact that these systems are complex. Maybe they're in a pharmaceutical environment, they may be validated, so updates are infrequent because they present challenges. So what we need to be able to do is prioritize risk and report on how we're managing that risk. So a fundamental component of the Verve vulnerability management platform is to provide this risk calculation in real time. So we need to provide the tools to our operators to help them identify and prioritize. We need to provide them with the information to focus on critical elements of those assets, those systems that are critical, either from a safety point of view, to an availability point of view, maybe to an integrity or confidentiality point of view. We need to consider attributes such as the vulnerability, so traditional CVEs, CVSS, so the severity of the vulnerability, or other aspects such as end-of-life status, and any other mitigations that may already be in place, such as there is EDR or whitelisting, for example, already implemented in the network. It may be that there are other compensating controls like network segmentation, but a traditional risk assessment process will look at what the asset is, how critical is the asset or the system, and risk components such as the impact to the operator, and that's very subjective. The impact of a loss of an asset to one operator is not necessarily going to be the same to everyone. So these are all customizable components within the Verve platform. And what we produce is this, what we call a raw unmitigated risk score. Then we need to factor in compensated controls. Again, we will often find that customers have some compensated controls, even in very low maturity customers. There will be some form of compensated controls, maybe multi-factor authentication is in use or so on, but it is a compensated control. And what we're aiming to achieve is an accurate estimated residual risk score. So this is the nirvana, if you like, for our system owners, and this is what Verve gives you, is estimated residual risk score, factoring all these different components that allow you to focus in on the most effective remediation, where you're going to target assets that really need to be remediated. That might be patching, that might be hardening in some other way, but the platform is going to give you that crucial information. So that's what we talk about when we talk about identify, but the platform goes further. So we're creating the asset inventory, we're mapping vulnerabilities against that inventory, and then we're performing analysis. So the analysis tells us where do we need to remediate and how do we need to remediate. But the Verve platform goes further. It has integrated remediation tools such as patching. So we know that we take CISA gives us guidance around patching in OT, the sort of now, next, never approach. Now, of course, being immediate, this is a serious vulnerability we need to patch on systems that are impacted. Now could be done on the next patch or next maintenance window. Never, quite a few OT assets will fall into the never category simply because there are no patches available for them. So in which case we need to look at other kinds of remediation. It could be network segmentation, it could be system hardening. But patch management is all managed from within the Verve tool. We can harden the systems as well from within the Verve tool, so we could enforce password complexity, for example. We can check the operating system hardening against US Department of Defense or CIS benchmarking guidelines. We can look at network and firewall configuration to make sure that the configuration of active network devices are compliant with best practice to make sure that they're hardened. And we can track these changes, so we can track the effectiveness of these. Are these changes that we're making actually being effective in bringing our risk score down in real time? So Verve, we get all of these capabilities within the Verve platform at a local and a global view as well. But there are additional features that many of our operators find useful, such as being able to report on system health, the resource utilization on network systems and on OS and on anything with a CPU. What about end of life and life cycle reporting? We've spoken a few times about OT systems being, often containing, shall we say, extended life cycle assets that are probably beyond their natural life. What is the impact of that on the overall risk? And maybe do we need to focus our migration and modernization plans elsewhere on systems that are more vulnerable because of this? We're looking at a review of users, what users are interacting with the system, removing unused accounts and so on. We're looking at data flows. How does the system communicate? That can again provide us additional useful information when we're talking about segmentation. Lots of event logs that can be fed into existing cybersecurity monitoring systems such as your SIEM or your SOAR or CMDB and so on. But all of these capabilities are built in natively into the Verve platform. And when it comes to being able to demonstrate compliance, the reporting capabilities, the ability to demonstrate to a regulator, you understand what you've got, you're managing the vulnerabilities, you're reporting on continuous improvement. These are all extremely valuable capabilities that are built into the platform. The results are demonstrable. This is an analysis from a Verve customer with a before and after analysis of compliance across a number of different metrics, again from the NIST framework against identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And you can see that there's a marked improvement. We are going to share these slides afterwards. I should have said at the start of this, so you can review this in more detail. But tracking the effectiveness of a cybersecurity program and tracking the return on investment on platforms like Verve is absolutely critical. So the ability to do this and to track your effectiveness is really important as well. But it's not just Verve. Of course, the Verve platform that came into this business unit in November last year is a really crucial part when it comes to vulnerability management. But we've built, as I said at the start, a number of services up over the last 10 or 12 years or so to help in many different ways. Some of them are called out here, and they align very directly to some of the NIS2 obligations. So, for example, around policies and procedures, as I said earlier, a really important part of OT cybersecurity management is recognizing that you need to manage OT cybersecurity in a different way to IT. So the ability to test that through things like tabletop exercise, through a review of that incident response plan, through carrying out OT risk assessments and so on, or even a tech-enabled risk assessment. So using the Verve platform to analyze your risk is a really useful part of compliance. I'm not going to go through all these line by line. You can see there's quite a lot on there, and it's quite a complex task to really achieve full compliance. Some of these capabilities will exist already, but there's a lot that we can do. So what's the call to action here? Well, as we've identified, NIS2 is coming. In a couple of weeks' time, it will start to become law in some of the member states, and the rest will not be far behind, although there are some challenges in bringing that into force. We've seen a lot of interest in NIS2 because of the change in some of the liabilities versus the original NIS directive. So the addition of individual liability versus just corporate liability that we saw in the original NIS directive is definitely focusing a lot of our customers' minds. And the fact is that these cybersecurity breaches are increasing. Over 60% of industrial manufacturers have experienced a breach in some shape or form in the last 3 years. Ransomware as a service, as I mentioned earlier, is prolific. Unfortunately, we deal with the consequences of this on a all too regular basis, unfortunately, and so we need to take action. So there are a few practical steps that you can take. Obviously, by joining the webinar today, you've hopefully got a bit more of an idea of what the legislation involves and some of the ways in which we can help. But we do offer a NIS2 readiness assessment. So this is a service whereby we will analyze where you are today. So what are your existing cybersecurity policies, procedures, countermeasures, network design, and so on. What do they look like? How effective are they? And what is the gap between what you're currently doing now and how you're operating compared to what you're going to need for NIS2? This will help you define your compliance strategy. There could be a risk management solution. Obviously, we're here talking about Verve today. This will be a really excellent, you'll be able to demonstrate a really excellent return on investment through a kind of platform when it comes to being able to demonstrate to track and implement and report on your vulnerability management in real time. And fundamentally, you need to understand your assets, and asset inventory is fundamental to any cybersecurity program, regardless of whether you're trying to be compliant with NIS or any other piece of legislation. Understanding what you've got, understanding how they behave, understanding the vulnerabilities associated with these assets is absolutely crucial. You need to know what you have in order to know how to protect it. So, crucial first step. And as I said earlier, we can put this down as step one and be quite flippant. This is, do step one, then we move on to step two. Step one can be very complex and time consuming and costly. And that's definitely in the identify stage, somewhere we can be very effective in helping our customers with their compliance. So we've left a little bit of time for questions. I think, Andre, you may have been reviewing some of them while I was wrapping up with the last part there.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I will let you breathe a little bit. And I will start picking some questions and answering them. Jack Delancas is asking about what about the defense sector? Let me start with this one. The directive does not apply to any public administration entities that carry out their activities in the areas of national security, public security, defense, or law enforcement. So this is not covered by the directive.
Mm-hmm.
There is another question about, are there any difference in requirements for essential entities versus important entities? In the directive itself, always refer to both important and essential entities. But in principle, there is no distinction on the requirements. There is distinction on the penalty levels, as we've seen in the presentation. Nevertheless, I think that we must stay vigilant to the transposition into each country local law if there is any specific requirement. But in principle, the directive refers to both.
Yeah, I think what I would just a comment on that one, Andre, what we saw from the original NIS directive is that what we have seen is with, for example, let's take power production, power generation as an example. In the UK, at least, if you produce power over a certain number of megawatts or gigawatts, or you're producing power serving over a certain number of properties, then you're still in scope for the legislation, but you may be required to demonstrate a lower level of compliance. So in the UK, we have two profiles. We call it basic and enhanced profile. For certain aspects of the assessment framework, for the NIS compliance framework, you may be, the regulator may accept compliance with basic profile versus a larger power producer, producing many gigawatts of electricity, will have to demonstrate a more enhanced compliance with the legislation. So I would imagine we're going to see similar with NIS2.
Okay, another one. Any ideas on when the UK, as no longer an EU member, will be required to comply with NIS2?
Yeah.
I think this is a kind of several answers here. First thing, if it's a UK corporation, UK company, but has manufacturing plants in any of the essential or important sectors in any country on the European Union, that company, that corporation will be obliged to comply with NIS2 on that operations. Having said that, if it's a UK corporation with operations, with facilities only in the UK government said explicitly that they are not going to adopt NIS2 as they are not anymore part of the European Union. Having said that, they are evolving the cybersecurity regulation. And there is an expectation that there may be there will be an evolution from the NIS that it's adopted in the UK, and there will be some potential divergence between the UK new regulation and NIS2. And it's basically about a few areas: the managed service providers, the incident notifications, and the exempt organizations, etc. Then more to come. John, I'm not sure if you have any specific...
Yeah, so the new government, as we've got in the UK now, confirmed in the King's Speech that we will have new cybersecurity legislation coming down the tracks probably next year. So I think if we hadn't had a change of government, we may have got this by now, but it's confirmed that it is coming. And we don't expect that there's going to be anything dramatically different to NIS2, because that would just complicate the burden of compliance for UK companies. But yeah, we'll probably see something next year, or certainly a lot more clarity on what's going to come next year. But I would expect it to be an evolution of the current law that we have in the UK to include additional operators, as NIS2 has done.
There's another one about defense sector we already answered. There are several questions about a specific type of activities like manufacturing, IT, or if transport includes automotive tier 1, part suppliers, etc. As is stated on the directive, one of the ways to look at if a specific entity or industry is impacted or falls into one or another sector is by looking at the NIS code, at the nomenclature of economic activities, which is an European classification of economic activities. And the companies are registered with a specific NIS code that describes their business, their activity. Then in the directive itself, it mentioned for each of the categories the NIS code that are falling or are impacting when there are doubts. There are a few that are more kind of left to interpretation or generic, but for a lot of them, there are very specific. For instance, there is a category which is within manufacturing of motor vehicles, trailers, and semi-trailers. And the directive itself refers to activities referred in Section C, Division 29 of NIS Revision 2. For instance, manufacturer of other transport equipment, which may be a part supplier for Tier 1 automotive. Someone may think, should I fall into this category? Yes, no. Explicitly in the directive, it says that it's undertaking, carrying out any economic activities referred into Section C, Division 30 of NIS Revision 2. Then, if in doubt, you can just go to the directive itself. But as I said, you also later on need to check in your specific country local law transposition if there is any specific clarification or addition.
And I think this is something that we would cover if we're going to provide a NIS2 readiness assessment to understand which parts of your business, which parts of your operations are going to fall into scope for NIS2. And that's something that we would cover in the readiness assessment. But as you say, Andrea, there's a lot of information on the European Union website that can provide additional guidance. But I think looking at the time, maybe this is where we wrap it up for today, Andrea. Unless there's anything else particularly burning, but the recording of this webinar will be made available for those that either want to enjoy it again or maybe pass on to colleagues to review. The slide deck will be shared as well. But with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining and wish you all the best with your NIS2 compliance.
Thank you all for your time and participation.